And that means that we have been doing this show in this format for 20 years. We started the show in this particular format, in this current format. We started the show in 2001, and we've been doing the show in this format for 20 years. And I'm happy to keep producing show after show and keep doing this 20 years in the running. I've been doing a show, not this particular show, but I've been doing a show for 26 straight years. And so this year marks the 20th year in this format as the Howie Silbiger Show, and I'm happy to be here. There are going to be a couple of changes, though. We're making a few changes, and the changes are going to take effect starting this month. The full-length Howie Silbiger Show, the show that you are watching right now, which is the full-length version of the Howie Silbiger Show, will air on Sunday nights, as it currently is. And Political Hitman will air at midnight on Tuesdays. So Wednesday morning at midnight, so Tuesday, 11:59 p.m. The Political Hitman will air on True Talk Radio and on Israel News Talk Radio. So we're going to continue doing that. But those are the only two full-length programs I'm going to do during the week. The rest of the week I will spend, perhaps the plan is, now of course plans sometimes change, but the current plan is that I will be producing some commentaries that will air on True Talk Radio, and we'll have video versions right here on the True Talk Radio network. So I'll post up video versions onto Facebook, onto Twitter, onto YouTube. So that's what I'm going to do. So the full length version we'll do on Sunday night. Sheldon will be here. I'll be here. Eventually, Mark will be back. He'll be here, and outside of that, I'm going to just do some shorts. I'm not going to do full versions of the show outside of Sundays anymore. You could call in 1-877-669-1292. Of course, you can follow all the news and all the latest updates on the Howie Silbiger Show by going to the Howie Silbiger Show page on Facebook, or by following the Howie Silbiger Show group on Facebook. That's where all the information from the show will be heard, will be posted. Later on in the show, I'll be joined by Mayor Weinstein. He is the chairman of the Jewish Defense League Canada. They have been actively busy, and we'll be talking about the anti-Jewism in Canada. It is a growing problem, and it is something that we have to talk about. So we'll be talking about anti-Jewism in Canada a little later on with Mayor Weinstein from the Jewish Defense League. Right now, I want to talk to you, and I want you to talk to me. So feel free to call in. 1-877-669-1292. It is a live show, so feel free to call in. 1-877-669-1292. Now, like I said, the plan is that we won't be doing the full version of the show, the long version of the show, during the week. It'll be a Sunday show, as it has been for 20-odd years. And during the week, I will hopefully be able to do some commentary pieces, a few minutes of commentary pieces, throughout the week, and of course, Political Hitman on Wednesday mornings, Wednesdays at midnight in the morning. Now, the reasons behind this, there's various reasons behind this. I know some people say, "Oh, you always say you're changing things and you never do anything," and there's reasons why things happen the way they happen, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with income. It doesn't necessarily have to do with the amount of money I make from the show, because I make no money from the show. The show costs me money every month. Studio here costs money. The equipment I purchase for the show costs money. The streaming costs money. It all costs money. Everything costs money. Nothing in life is free. And I gladly pay the money. I gladly spend the money because I think it's important. I think what I do on the air is important. I think it is important that we talk about issues that most people aren't talking about. I think it's important that we discuss things that people don't tend to discuss, and I think it's important that we look at at situations, and we evaluate situations in ways people do not evaluate those situations. And the truth is that we've break some stories here on the Howie Silbiger show. For instance, just a couple of weeks ago, nobody's picked up the story, but just a couple of weeks ago, I told you about schools changing their lockdown procedures because of COVID. So so schools have ordered their children to stay at their desks in the case of a lockdown, where before they would go and huddle in a corner, run to safety. Now they're ordered to stay at their desk for fear of giving each other COVID, for COVID reasons. Now, one has to think that if there's an active shooter in a school, and a child remains at his desk or her desk, then that child is an active target. But apparently the threat of somebody firing a bullet into our children is less scary than the threat of our children giving each other COVID. This is the kind of COVID lunacy that we've come to. This is the kind of lunacy the world has come to. And the lunacy continues. It expands from there. So I found 3 schools, and we're still looking, but we found 3 schools so far that have changed their lockdown procedures to allow to order teachers to keep the children at the desks rather than huddle in a safe corner during a lockdown in a school. It is outrageous. It is absolutely outrageous, and it is a story that only we are covering, which is fascinating to me. Now, moving on from there, there is a theory going around, and I'm picking my words carefully because I don't want to be misinterpreted. So I'm picking my words very carefully. It has been reported over a course of a few months, quite a few months, that there was that the Hasidic community, the Jewish community, the Hasids, the people who dress in the black gowns, the black clothing with the hats, and the beards and the sideburns, that the Hasidim have been super spreaders of COVID. Now we've heard this over and over again. Right at the beginning of the COVID scare, way back in March of last year, the newspapers, one after another, ran stories about the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community spreading COVID. And then they started running, every time they had a COVID story, they would run a picture of a synagogue to accompany that COVID story. And we've seen that year after year, month after month, not year after year, month after month. We've seen that in newspapers. And then we've heard people say that, that the biggest spreaders of COVID are the Hasidic community. We heard the governor of New York say that during a press conference. In fact, not only did he say that, but his visuals during that press conference were of Hasidim dancing and praying, which visually stamped into the minds of people watching that press conference that the biggest threat to the population when it comes to COVID is Hasidic people praying. This is a form of anti-Jewism. This is a form of hatred of Jews that is manifesting itself. It is a blood libel. You see, blood libels blame Jews for things that happened that the non-Jews couldn't explain, or because they wanted to take the Jews and they wanted to lessen the Jews. So blood libels date back to the 15th century Russia, where they said that Jews were killing Catholic kids to make matzah around Passover time. It continued on with Jews run the banks and they run the corporations, and therefore they control the world. They run the governments. It continued with then Jews through their blessing of their food and the kosherism of their food. Being kosher doesn't necessarily mean the food is blessed, but that's a different story altogether. But that Jews, because they eat different foods and because they eat kosher food, somehow they feel superior to everybody else. And they go on and on and on. And the latest one is that Jews feel that they're immune to COVID-19, and therefore the Hasidic Jews are super spreaders because they refuse to wear masks, and they refuse to and they refuse to social distance, and they want to keep their schools open. Therefore, they are super spreaders, and they're the cause of the current outbreak of COVID-19. And I've heard this over and over again for months and months and months and months. And for months, I've been talking and posting on Facebook and fighting with people, arguing with them that this is not the case, that the Hasidic community is not to blame for the outbreaks of COVID-19. And on I went, defending the Hasidic community, because I feel that people shouldn't get a bad rap, that people should be held accountable. People should be held accountable for their actions, but they're not solely the people who are spreading COVID-19. And then there was a story last week that 2 Hasidic schools were raided in Montreal, and they were fined because they were running their schools during the COVID-19 lockdown. Horrors of horrors, kids were going to learn during the lockdown for COVID-19. Now, many people found this horrific. How could you take kids in school? How could you put them at risk? And the question begs to be answered, and I'm still asking the same question. I get roasted on this all the time. And I don't mind getting roasted on it because many of the regulations for COVID-19. Now, I understand there are a lot of people who are very sick with COVID-19. I understand a lot of people have died from COVID-19. I understand people with underlying medical conditions could be extremely sick, and it's an extremely dangerous disease for people who are at risk. But I also understand that there's a 99.95% survival rate of COVID-19. Now, aside from that, putting that aside, I also understand that politicians like using these kind of disease and these kind of scare tactics in order to control the population. And that's essentially what is happening right now. The population is being controlled. For instance, take a look at this this ruling in Quebec. We're going to talk about Quebec because we're in Quebec. Take a look at the ruling in Quebec that only essential services, only essential goods could be sold in stores. So the Quebec government came out and said that stores that sell non-essential goods have to close, and stores that sell essential goods could stay open. But they never defined what they considered essential. They gave guidelines, yes, health and home renovation, home repair, and they gave general guidelines, but they didn't say specifically what they considered essential, what they didn't consider essential. So right now in Quebec, anywhere in Quebec, you can walk into one store and not be able to buy something, and walk into the store next door and be able to buy that same item, because the Quebec government didn't give a list of items on what is essential. You can walk into Walmart and see that winter coats in middle December in Quebec, where the temperature is in sub-zero temperatures, are not essential items, and they're blocked off from being purchased. But sunscreen is an essential item that is sitting on the counter ready to be bought. The lunacy of this kind of edict is just mind-boggling. It is just absolutely mind-blowing that one has to wonder what kind of stupidity, and really it's stupidity, what kind of stupidity it is to think that this is somehow going to stem the spread of COVID. As we can see, lockdowns don't necessarily work. They don't work at all. If lockdowns worked in March, when the first lockdowns happened, COVID would have died, but it didn't. And here we are, we're all in lockdown again, and the numbers are rising, not falling. So lockdowns don't work. So here we are sitting in lockdown with not being able to buy things that should be essential, like winter coats, like gloves, like hats, like boots, things that should be considered essential in the middle of the winter. And we cannot buy those seemingly essential stuff. But you can go and you can buy sunscreen, and you can buy bathing lotion. That's totally essential. You tell me it makes any sense. I have not been able to make sense of many of the COVID laws. But yet, we continue to follow them because we are compliant with the government. We don't want to fight. Schools are closed because schools are closed. People who want to educate their kids, there are people who want to educate their kids, have to do it online. But what about schools where online is impossible? There are certain schools, religious schools, that don't work on the internet. So people who don't work on the internet, are they just plain out of luck? Is that really what happens? That they're plain out of luck, and okay, so you don't have internet, too darn bad. Go get internet. Are we supposed to lose our integrity because the government tells us we have to? Doesn't make sense to me. It's not logical. And because it's not logical, people aren't following it. Because it's not logical, people just are just shrugging their shoulders. And I think the shrugging of the shoulders is probably more dangerous than the spread of disease. Because if people aren't watching what they're doing, it's more problematic than the disease spreading, isn't it? 1-877-669-1292. That's 1-877-669-1292. I was in a bakery the other day. I'm standing in line in the bakery waiting to place my order. There are 7 people allowed in the bakery. Everybody else has to wait outside. So there's 7 of us standing in line waiting to order. There's a gentleman behind me, a Hasidic gentleman behind me. He is not wearing a mask, and he's talking on his cell phone. Behind him, there's another gentleman. I'm standing in front of him. There's a lady standing in front of me, and there's somebody at the counter being served. The gentleman behind the Hasidic man says to him, "Hey, buddy, put a mask on." And the Hasidic guy just ignores him. He has his cell phone, and he's busy talking. And the guy behind him says again, "Hey, buddy, you're not wearing a mask. Put your mask on." The Hasidic guy turns to him and says to him, "Listen, I don't have a mask. I don't have one. What do you want me to do? I don't have one." The guy says, "Well, get out of the store and go find one." And the Hasidic guy says, "Well, look, I just want to get some bread, and then I'll go." The guy says, "No, you can't stand here without a mask. It is the law. That is what the government has mandated. It is the law." So eventually they started fighting back and forth, and the Hasidic guy went to the counter, he got a mask, he put his mask on, then got back into line. All right, fine. So he's wearing the mask. The guy didn't let up either. The guy behind him never let up. So now the guy's wearing a mask. The guy says, "Pull it up over your nose." So the Hasidic guy pulls it up over his nose. Then the guy starts lecturing him. "Is this what they teach you in the yeshiva? Is this what they teach you in religious school? Is this what they teach you how to behave? It is a desecration of God's name for you to be standing there." And he laces into the guy and continues to lace into the guy even after the guy put the mask on. I'm standing there and I'm wondering, and I'm thinking, first of all, I know, and it is clear, and you can look it up because it is 100% true, that there is absolutely zero evidence, zero scientific proof that masks are effective in COVID. They say that masks perhaps help you because your spit is being caught into the mask, but the microbes of COVID are so small that the masks are fairly insignificant. Okay, so let's say they help just a little bit. We'll give it just a little bit. They help a bit. Fine. The freak out over somebody not wearing a mask, the freak out over little things that people do, the fear that has been infesting the communities, where people in the community are encouraged by the government to rat each other out, to report on each other if there's a violation of government standards. This kind of lunacy is almost impossible to back up. So once you've turned people on each other, and once you've created a my side, your side, and the government side of population, it is impossible to back it up. You can't turn it around again. The unity that we once had as a community is now gone. And so the government has turned us onto each other. Now, governments that do that, historically, have been governments that have been trying to oppress minorities, that have been trying to oppress different segments of society. We saw it in Nazi Germany. We saw it in fascist Italy. You saw this kind of turning populations against each other, having people report each other. In Russia, communist Russia, they did that. having people report each other, having people turn on each other, having people not like each other, and having the suspicion between people. Once you create the suspicion between people, it's hard to say that we are a unified society. Now, Quebec started it before COVID with Law 21, where they said that they can't trust people in the classroom who wear yarmulkes, who wear turbans, or who wear hijabs. They're not trustworthy in the classroom. They started it. They started dividing society then. They started even before then, but that was the catalyst for the current division of society. And then when COVID came along, it wasn't hard to take that irrational fear of the other that was created with the Law 21 and to paste it, to copy and paste it into this COVID thing. So now, instead of fearing people with turbans and people with face coverings, which was the initial fear that they created, now you could fear people without face coverings. You see how they flipped it? First, you weren't allowed to wear a mask. They were passing laws saying that if you want to get your driver's license, you couldn't have any kind of face covering. And now they flipped it and said, now you can't go into public without a face covering. See how that works? And society doesn't seem to see, the general public tends to ignore the hypocrisy involved in this, which is the most shocking part of this whole thing, is that the government could flip-flop, drive up, and then drive down again, and everyone just says, all right. The government could say, we're closing your stores and your restaurants, your gyms, your bars. You can't do anything, sit at home and do nothing, and people could lose their businesses, lose their livelihoods, lose their lives' work. And the population sits around and just accepts it because the fear of COVID is in the air. It's quite scary when you come to think of it that we could be manipulated in this way. It's quite scary that we allow the government to manipulate us in this way. Are you scared of COVID? Are you scared if you had a store? Would you open the store? Do you have a store that you've had to close? Would you prefer to be opened? You could follow COVID regulations. All stores can't they? If the government tells you can only have 10% of the amount of people allowed in your store, so if you could generally have 50 people in your place, you could have 5. Does not make sense. You could have 10. Excuse me. Does not make sense. I'm asking you. 1-877-669-1292. That's 1-877-669-1292. I'm Howie Silbiger. This is the Howie Silbiger Show. Right here on the True Talk Radio Network. We take a couple of minute break. Well, we'll take maybe a 30-second break. We'll be back just after this. Welcome back to the Howie Silbiger Show right here on the True Talk Radio Network. Thank you so much for being here. I am happy to be here with you, and I'm glad that you are here with me. You can give me a call. 1-877-669-1292 is the number to call. That's 1-877-669-1292. These COVID regulations, I think they're ridiculous. I think that we have to be careful. I think that washing our hands and using the hand sanitizers when you don't have the opportunity to wash your hands, taking the opportunity to wear a mask, because if there's a 0.01% chance that you're not going to transmit the disease to somebody else, you should wear the mask. Aside from that, I think social distancing is a great idea. Stay away from people as much as possible until you can get the vaccine out there to enough people for people to be safe. That is the goal, right? For people to be safe. The goal should not be to scare the bejeebers out of everybody, so that when children are playing on a skating rink in middle of a city town, in middle of a city park, that the police should be called and the children should be yanked out of the rink, because instead of 15 kids on the ice, there are 20 kids on the ice. think we're going a little too far with the fear mongering. I think we're going a little too far with the fear, with infesting the community with fear. I think we have to scale it back a little bit, to bring it back a little bit to normalcy. Every scientific study I've read, and I've read tons of them, every scientific study I've read has said that COVID-19 is insignificant. The spread of COVID-19 is insignificant when you are outside and you are 6 feet apart from each other. It's insignificant. It doesn't even register on their scale. So, I mean, here we are. I mean, if you're standing outside or you're playing outside and you're breathing and fine, I mean, there's no significant risk of catching COVID. Now, of course, you don't want 100 people on the ice, but if the limit, the arbitrary limit that the city set was 15 people, and 20 people were on the ice, is there a reason to call the police? Is there a reason to freak out? And this is what we're seeing. I mean, to me, it's scary. It's scary that people freak out the way they freak out, and it's scary to me that we allow these things to happen, and that we're not ashamed of it, that we just let it happen, and that we just allow it to go, and then we allow people to scapegoat Jews and point their fingers at the Hasidic Jewish community and say they are responsible. We allow that to happen. The Jewish community wasn't really all that upset about that. We didn't hear very many people screaming and yelling, and we for sure did not see 50,000 people get in the street and protest the false accusation that the Hasidic community is responsible for the spread of COVID. We don't see too many people complaining about it. And that is the issue I've had with the Jewish community from day one, is that when things happen in the Jewish community, we always point fingers and we always try to blame the other. The divisions in the Jewish community are sad, they're scary, and they shouldn't exist. The Lubavitcher Rebbe once said, "A Jew is a Jew, regardless. There's no such thing as a religious Jew or a non-religious Jew. A Jew is a Jew," and that's the way we should be looking at it. Well, I don't like using the terms, and I hardly use them. I don't use them on the show very often. The term ultra-Orthodox, I don't use it very often because I don't think it's an accurate term. I don't think a person who's considered ultra-Orthodox is any more Orthodox than a person who's Orthodox. And a person who's Orthodox is no more Orthodox than a person who's modern Orthodox. So I don't like these terms. Observant, non-observant, I could live with that. Because that's the differentiation between people who follow Judaism and the rules of Judaism and people who don't follow Judaism and the rules of Judaism. So those divisions I could live with. But when we start talking about micro breaking up, micro separating the community, that doesn't really work for me all that much. So I like it when we talk about the Orthodox community, we're talking about the Orthodox community, from modern Orthodox straight through to what a lot of people would consider ultra Orthodox, whatever that means. And when we talk about the non-Orthodox community, we talk about everyone from conservatives straight through down to Reform, down to Reconstructionists. We talk about all that group of people. And then they're two totally separate outlooks, two totally separate views on Judaism, two totally separate political views. It's a completely different community, and this is what we talk about when we talk about the separation of one and the other. So when you point fingers at the Orthodox community, you're pointing fingers at a large segment of the Jewish population who are not necessarily huge. They're not necessarily a huge factor in the spread of COVID-19. There are other communities that are spreading COVID-19 also, but somehow, whenever a newspaper runs an article about the COVID-19 spread, they tend to put a picture of a synagogue on the cover of their paper. Somehow that's appropriate. I haven't seen too many mosques or churches put onto the cover, although I know for a fact that mosques and churches have been running services the same way synagogues have, trying to follow the rules, as crazy and as stupid and as arbitrary as they are, trying to follow the rules of COVID. I've seen mosques and churches running their services, but I haven't seen too many newspapers covering them. I haven't seen too many reporters camped out in front of a mosque taking pictures of Muslims going in to pray. But I've seen them camped out in front of a synagogue taking pictures of Jews going in to pray. Haven't seen too many police raids on mosques or churches, but I have seen police raids on synagogues. And I believe that the hatred of Jews is always just fluttering under the surface, and it always pops up in all these cases. It pops out, and we suffer the consequences of that. So, do Jews violate the laws of COVID or the recommendations of COVID, the edicts of the governments for COVID? Do we follow them as stringently as other communities? I would say, from what I've seen, pretty much. Are we blatantly thumbing our noses at the authorities and saying we don't want to follow this, we don't believe in this? To a certain extent, a minority of people are, but a minority of people are in all the different segments of the population. And the Jewish population is no different than any other segment of the population. And in the Jewish community, there are those who thumb their nose, but the majority of the community is following the rules and following them according to government standards. And so to point the finger at the Jewish community and to say that the Jewish community is somewhat more responsible for the passing of COVID than any other community is a blood libel, and it is unacceptable, and we should all be outraged by it. And why there are no protests in the streets, and why we don't hear B'nai B'rith and Federation screaming and yelling about this, why we don't hear, why we don't see anybody really sticking their head up and saying, hey, wait a second, what the heck is going on here, is beyond me. Why we're so apathetic when it comes to attacks in our community is beyond me. I've never been apathetic. For the last 20 years on this show, I've been screaming and yelling. For the last 26 years on radio, I've been screaming and yelling. For the last 30 years as an activist, I've been screaming and yelling. And I will continue to scream and yell as long as my voice is coming out of my body, as long as I'm able to think. Got a message on Facebook saying, shh, don't upset the Goyim, don't upset the non-Jews. The Sei Still attitude was the attitude of the ghetto Jews in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and 80s and 90s. I think it's time to shatter that illusion, to shatter that idea. I don't care if we upset the non-Jews. Let me be honest. I don't care. I didn't care when I was 18 years old and I started Save All Jews Everywhere. And we protested, and we had a march against anti-Jewism in Canada. And we did all sorts of political activities and Jewish activities on campus. And we were condemned every step of the way by mainstream Jewish organizations like B'nai B'rith and Canadian Jewish Congress and Federation CJA. In fact, we were so condemned by Federation CJA that 10 years later, I was 29 years old, and I was doing a radio show at Radio Shalom, the Jewish community radio station, and the president of Federation was coming in to speak about some Federation initiative. I had the most popular show on the station, and the station was forced to bring another host in, throw me out of my studio, bring another host in, because the president of Federation refused to sit with me. That's how much I don't care what they think of me. That's how much I don't care. And that's what they did. The station brought in another host during my show. I started the show. Then another host came in. I had to leave the studio before the president of Federation would come in and talk to the Jewish community because he refused to be in the same room with me. Because I hold people accountable. I hold people accountable for what they are doing. If they are promoting assimilation and promoting assimilation and the lessening of the Jewishness of the Jewish community, I hold them accountable. And they got upset with me, Federation, because I yelled about the Y opening on Shabbos. I said on the Jewish Sabbath, the Y should not be opened. The Jewish Y has to be Jewish. There has to be something Jewish about the Y. And opening on Saturday is not Jewish. So the least they could do, the bare minimum they could do, is keep their building closed on Saturday. I lost the battle. It was a long battle. It was a hard-fought battle. I lost the battle, and I simply lost it because the Jewish community wanted to be like everyone else. They got mad at me because when the Sadie Bronfman Center became the Siegel Center for Performing Arts, because Alvin Siegel decided to give millions of dollars, and so they ripped Sadie Bronfman's name off the building and put Alvin Siegel's name on the building. And when they did that, the tradition of the Sadie Bronfman Center was that they were a Jewish theater, so they didn't open on Friday nights and Saturdays. They didn't work Friday nights and Saturdays. And when Alvin Siegel took over, the great Alvin Siegel, when he took over, and his name went on the building, and his money controlled what was happening in that building, then suddenly the building was having plays 1 minute, starting 1 minute after Sabbath. 1 minute. Yes, that means the audience has to be there. That means the performers have to be there. That means the orchestra or whatever have to be there. That means the lighting people have to be there. Everybody has to be there on the Sabbath in order to watch the play 1 minute after the Sabbath. Give me a break. And they were getting money from Federation, from the Y. They were getting money to uphold Jewish culture. This is why Federation was angry at me. B'nai B'rith was angry at me too, and the executive director of B'nai B'rith, before this one, the guy before this one, came to me one day and said to me, Howie, we love what you're doing. Keep doing it, but we're going to keep condemning you in the public. Because we can't stand behind you because what you're doing is against what the Jewish community wants. The organized Jewish community wants to be able to be more like everyone else. They lost the concept that the beauty of Judaism, the beauty of being Jewish, is that we are different from everyone else. That we didn't assimilate. It always makes me laugh when I see menorahs are being lit by these organizations. They're putting up these huge menorahs, and they're lighting and celebrating Hanukkah when they're having Saturday afternoon pork-infested meetings. Well, the idea of Hanukkah, the whole story of Hanukkah, was not so much the lighting of the candles in 8 days. The miracle of Hanukkah, wasn't so much that the oil lasted for 8 days. It should have lasted for 1 day. That was one of the miracles. The main miracle of Hanukkah, the main thing that is celebrated in Hanukkah, and if you read the book of the Maccabees, this is the story of Hanukkah, is the fact that the Jews were fighting against the Hellenists, the people who wanted to assimilate Jews into society, and won. And Judaism won over Hellenism. Judaism won over assimilation. So seeing the assimilationists of today, lighting menorahs and saying Happy Hanukkah, it's kind of oxymoronic if you ask me. Well, maybe not so oxymoronic, but moronic nonetheless. 1-877-669-1292. And then you also see them trying to connect Hanukkah to Christmas. It's really sickening, some of the things they do. A local synagogue they have this little doll called an elf on a shelf. And it's a Christmas doll. And good on them. People who celebrate Christmas, they really do a great job marketing Christmas. And I'm really proud. I'm really happy for them. They have a holiday. They're celebrating their holiday. Good on them. But Jews don't celebrate Christmas. But of course, Jews are jealous of the Christians who celebrate Christmas, naturally. So one of the synagogues went out and bought something called a mensch on a bench, which was a takeoff on an elf on a shelf. So already we have a Christmas imagery, and then the synagogue started using it in their marketing campaign. What? Can't we do better than this? Can't we do better than this? It's revolting. If you ask me, it's revolting. And then we realize that no matter how much we try to assimilate into society, no matter how much we try to be like everyone else, society still hates the Jew. They still point the finger and say the Jew is responsible for COVID. The Jew, look at the Jew. Look what the Jew is doing. There could be a parking lot full of people for Christmas Mass, and the police don't raid it. But a Jewish school is open with 30 students, and bang, the police are there yanking them out by their payas. And we accept this. It's sickening. If you ask me, it's sickening. And I know I'm going to get flack for this. People are going to call me. People are going to email me, and they're going to send me messages saying, Howie, you're crazy. What are you talking about? Why do you talk like this? People are going to hate us more because you're talking like this. The truth is, if we don't talk about this, we don't start growing some guts to talk about things, then things will never, ever change. The biggest regret I had from leaving Radio Shalom was losing the platform where I could talk about these issues and reach the majority of the Jewish community. That was my biggest problem leaving Radio Shalom. Everything else there was crazy and was horrible to deal with. They were a terrible organization to deal with. I was there for 18 years. It was terrible. All 18 years of them. It was torture to be there. The only plus was that the signal hit the entire Jewish community and people were listening. That was the only plus there. I had the most popular show and people would listen to me. So when I talked about issues like this, it hit the ears that it had to hit, and it shook up the cages that the people had to shake. But other than that, it was terrible there. I'm Howie Silbiger, 1-877-669-1292. I'm going to take a couple of minute breaks, and when I come back, we'll be joined by Mayor Weinstein. He's the chairman of the Jewish Defense League in Canada. He'll be joining me by phone in just a couple of minutes, right here on the True Talk Radio Network. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Howie Silbiger Show right here on the True Talk Radio Network. Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you so much for being here. We're trying to connect with Mayor. When we get through him, he'll join it. When we get through to him, he will join us on the line. In fact, here he is now. We're joined now. I'm happy to welcome Mayor Weinstein to the program. Hi, Mayor. Mayor.
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Oh, why are we getting this echo? Hold on one second.
I don't know. I'm hearing an echo. Maybe I should call right back.
No, give me one sec. I think I figured it out. There we are.
Okay.
Are you there? Okay. It's just a little technical glitch here on the Howie Silbiger show. It happens occasionally.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining me, Mayor. I appreciate you taking time out of your Sunday evening to be here with me on the Howie
No
Silbiger
problem
show.
at all.
I wanted to congratulate you first of all for your work with food vendors. Now, for those that haven't been following this story, it's actually pretty fascinating that there is a food store in Middle Toronto that is putting up anti-Jewish and anti-Israel propaganda that Mayor's been fighting for a little while now. Mayor, tell us a little bit about the story. Tell us what's going on.
Well, I mean, I think the place has been around for a few years, and we heard of them through social media that they were anti-Israel and they're into BDS, and that really didn't, we didn't really care. But that's not exactly true that we didn't care. But we monitor different organizations that are heavily involved with BDS, and so fast forward to I think just before last summer, is when there's been more provocative BDS activity going on with that business, and it affected the Jewish community to a large extent. I don't think I've ever seen a time recently, anyways, where the community has been more unified in declaring the messaging from that establishment to be against the community.
So what were they doing, Mayor?
There was, for instance, posted on their social media that something like "No Zionists Allowed" here, and at a food establishment where you have that kind of messaging going on, we take that to mean no Jews allowed, and we have a history in Canada. Some Jews remember that. At the beaches years ago, there used to be signs, "No Jews or dogs allowed," and there were establishments that also said that as well. And so we're not going to put up with that. That's the message from the Jewish community. We're not going to be putting up with that kind of messaging. And CJ took action. There's other organizations and personalities who have taken action, and we had some protest activity outside of this establishment. It really resonated with the community. The community is not going to sit back any longer, and we were pretty front and center in leading at least the protests.
And how did food vendors react to this?
Well, they dug in, and the messaging seemed to be even more provocative. That even decorated the establishment with balloons. Now, that's fine. You could decorate it, if you're going to entertain people for a birthday party or whatever you want with balloons. But they made it very clear that they identify with the balloons from Gaza that are going into Israel, targeting agriculture, that are incendiary balloons. So when you do that at an establishment, that's really crossing the red line. And we could care less if, there was a sign there, "We love Gaza" or something like that. That doesn't bother us. Go ahead. Go there.
Everyone's entitled to their
be
political
with the
opinion.
people.
Yeah.
Stay there, whatever you want to do, as long as you want. But when it's the other messaging that came with it, that's different.
Mayor, I wanted to take a few minutes with you and talk about anti-Jewism in Canada. I talk a lot about anti-Jewism in the States and around the world. I hardly ever cover Canada. I remember years ago, maybe 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I used to cover the National Front and a bunch of other groups here in Canada, but they seem to have faded away, and Jew hatred still exists. I know it exists.
Yep.
But I don't know if it exists to the same extent it existed, let's say, in the early 2000s, late 90s.
I would say it's actually more serious than even then. I would say that what I have observed is almost a merger of minds from people on the extreme left and radical Islam and the extreme right. Not for nothing did a BDS leader, who's a staunch supporter of Iran, reach out and compliment the leader of the Canadian Nationalist Party, who is on record saying some of the most vile anti-Semitism. When they start finding common cause using terms like the Zionists, they embrace each other. There's a serious problem here. And the Jewish community is actually weaker today than it's ever been that I could ever recall. So it lacks the tools. We still have some fundamentals in place that we could be effective, but the tools are getting weaker in the community because the community is getting weaker.
Do you think that's a result of the community getting rid of organizations like Canadian Jewish Congress?
No, I don't. I think the Canadian Jewish Congress really, if you look at the Canadian Jewish Congress in terms of, let's say, the Ernst Sundell trial, they were not really the ones who were front and center. It was a Holocaust survivor that I worked with, Sabina Citron, that took the legal action that propelled the government to get involved, or the provincial government to get involved at that time against Ernst Sundell. And then the Canadian Jewish Congress wanted to have observer status in the court proceedings. Even when it came to tracking down Nazi war criminals in Canada, wasn't the Canadian Jewish Congress front and center. They did testify at the Shane Commission, but I testified as well.
Right.
And I would say Saul Littman, that led the Simon Wiesenthal Center, did a lot of research, and I worked with Saul on the issue of Nazi war criminals. I brought in a lot of people, but he drew a lot of attention also to the issue. I can't compliment the Canadian Jewish Congress on that. The Canadian Jewish Congress, I would say, more in terms of social issues with the Jewish communities through the maybe the which organization, Jewish National Fund or Jewish Federation, but the Federation is still around. So I would say CJA. I think CJA elevated the fight against anti-Semitism and the BDS much better than the Canadian Jewish Congress. I'm more complimentary about CJA. In fact, some of the people in CJA, and I have my criticisms about
right.
CJA too, but some of the people in CJA, for instance, Shimon Fogel, I think he's the still the CEO of CJA.
Yeah, he is.
I tip my hat to the guy. The guy has outstanding skill. I'd like to see more of what he has done and can do. I'd like to see a lot more because he has some very good abilities and skills. Certainly on the political level, I don't get involved. He's very good. There's some other people with CJA, the same thing I could say, but Canadian Jewish Congress, no, I don't. No, the only one that really misses those days is the former CEO of the Canadian Jewish Congress, Bernie Farber, who I would consider ineffective, and today hanging out with people who are making common cause with people like Peter Beinart, who is now anti-Israel.
I have to tell you that Bernie Farber and I go way back, and he was very instrumental in the continuous condemnations of my activities here in Montreal in the early 90s. So I'm quite aware of who Bernie Farber is and what he stands for.
Right.
Yeah. Now, where do you feel that the anti-Jewism that we saw in, let's say, the white nationalist groups that used to exist in Canada has now been kind of transferred into this anti-Israel, anti-Zionist movement, and that they're
I have no doubt. sometimes there's a slip of the tongue with these organizations when you monitor them, and you see some of the comments. Actually, they stop using the term Zionists, they use the term Jews.
Right.
So it's very clear. We know what they mean, and it's dangerous because some of these groups will side with and want to be part and identify with fully Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, the most radical expressions from Iran. We're living in dangerous times. These organizations, some of these groups, they use terms, so-called human rights terms, to try and justify their positions, make terrorists into human rights activists. It's very interesting because the charge against groups like JDL, you're a bunch of Islamophobes, you're so on and so forth, you hate Islam, or you're anti-Muslim. Nothing could be further from the truth, because when we see the Abraham Accords, we embrace that. We see a warm peace. We see that Arabs and Jews and Muslims getting on with something meaningful, something warm, an exchange. The CJ had an amazing program, in fact, on Hanukkah, that they had a Zoom meeting going on, and I was on it. I was watching this, and it was during the day, and they had over 2,000 viewers that joined them, Canadian Jews, and they had the ambassador from the United Arab Emirates on, and they had an Israeli member of Knesset, who's actually the daughter of Erwin Kotler, on. They had a few other outstanding Jewish leaders that were on. Shimon Fogel, of course, was on. In fact, he moderated it to a certain extent. And they lit the menorah in the United Arab Emirates, and it was like unbelievable. Go try and do that in Jordan, where there is a peace treaty. You can't do that. Go try and do that in Egypt, publicly, where there is a peace treaty. There's like cold peace deals with those countries, but with these new deals, Morocco, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, there's like this warm peace happening. We're very moved by the direction of these peace deals. We hope and we hear there's going to be more Arab and Islamic countries that are going to embrace peace with Israel. So we fully reject the accusation of being Islamophobes. We are targeting radical Islamic organizations, and those organizations that align themselves with radical Iran as well, and Hamas and Hezbollah. And those organizations are listed by the Canadian government as terrorist organizations. We're not Islamophobes, we're not bigots or anything, quite the contrary.
Well, I find that most of the time when the radical left disagrees with something you're going to do, you become a racist or an Islamophobe. That's the general default position when they try to oppose you. It's the way they try to tear you down.
Right.
If I could count, I don't have enough fingers to count on my hands how many times I've been called an Islamophobe, a homophobe, or some kind of phobe because I took a position on something, a moral position or a religious position on something, and suddenly I became a hater. Where
right.
in a lot of these senses, in a lot of these positions I take, I'm not really overly concerned about the issue to start with. But suddenly I become a hater because I didn't take the publicly accepted position. I took a contrary position.
Right.
And so I don't take those. At one time when you were called a racist, that meant something. That really, it really stung. It really meant something. You're a racist. I mean, wow, that was the lowest you could call someone. Today, it seems to be like, an everyday word. It's like calling someone a Nazi. It doesn't have an impact anymore because it's overused.
Well, that's true. That's true. In fact, the term Nazi, Nazis are responsible for the murder of 6 million Jews. And you just, off the top of your head, you get these leftists. Oh, you're a Nazi. Zionism is Nazism. Huh?
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't even make sense. It just shows how dumbed down our education system has gotten that college students don't even understand what Nazism is. I mean, it's just
it's something
sad.
that with all the programs, educational programs that went out from, let's say, the Canadian Jewish Congress and the Simon Wiesenfeld Center, et cetera, on Holocaust education, And we've come to this point that at the drop of a hat, this is the term they use, and it's so empty, and they don't even want to be corrected. They think they're so right by labeling, oh, you're a Nazi. And so all the money that was spent on this Holocaust education doesn't seem to have really led to anything meaningful.
Yeah, because you know why, Mayor. I put a lot of thought into this, and I've written a lot about this, and in my opinion, the reason that these terms have no meaning anymore is because Jews were taught, and I went through. I grew up in that generation, so I went through the education. Jews were taught that the Jews who died in the Holocaust were victims, and we were victims of the Holocaust, and we weren't victors of the Holocaust. We was never cast in a light where we won the war. Judaism's still around. I'm talking to you right here on this station.
Right.
I worked for a Jewish radio station for 15 years. We survived. Hitler's not here anymore. Nazis are gone. We're still here. We survived. The only thing you learn in Holocaust education is that there were piles of bodies and tractors running these bodies into mass graves. And there were crematorias and smoke coming out of the crematoria, and those were your grandparents. That's what you learned. But you never learned about the partisans. You never learned about the people in the forest. You never learned about the people underground in the tunnels and the fighting the Nazis. Those lessons were never taught to you. You learned the Dyer Van Frank, but you didn't learn about Mordechai and Alevich. So this is the issue, right? You never learned about Jabotinsky in school. You always learned about you always learned about Anne Frank, right? So why didn't we ever teach our kids or teach the generations about the heroes of the Holocaust, the people who fought, the people who fought the Nazis, people who stood up to the Nazis, the people who tried to save Jews? We never hear about these people. And only recently, only in the last 15 years, did Holocaust museums start putting in displays about life before the Holocaust or life of the partisans or these kind of things. I mean, the only time I ever heard about the partisans when I was a kid was when I went to a Holocaust memorial, the official Federation Holocaust Memorial, and they sang the Song of the Partisans. That was the only time I ever heard about the partisans.
No, listen, you're right. You're right. There's the emphasis is wrong. It's very unfortunate, but here we are today, 2021, looking back, and you're right. And then the terms people are using today, you're a Nazi, he's a Nazi, and they say that about Donald Trump. Could you believe it?
Yeah.
Jews say that. And, I mean, he's the best friend that Israel has ever had. And he's adopted the IRA definition of anti-Semitism and has taken action on college campuses in the States against anti-Semitism there. Alan Dershowitz said, this is historic, your proclamation against anti-Semitism. And Jews have the nerve to compare him to Hitler. It's unbelievable. Where's the education?
So how do we fight that kind of ignorance? How do we do it, Mayor? What do we do to fight that kind of ignorance? Is it too late? Did we lose that generation of Jews that have fallen to the abyss of?
I gotta tell you, I was thinking something like this over Shabbat. As I was reading the Parsha, and this is the last Parsha of Bereshis. And there's the story of Yaakov. He's ready to die, and he's going to bless his sons. And just as the parsha starts, he speaks with Joseph, who became the second most powerful ruler in Egypt, next to Pharaoh. It's where he rose to prominence. And it says that, like the Jews, they were supposed to leave Israel because of the famine and go temporarily into Egypt and then come back. And it states already that they're building, they're acquiring property, and so on and so forth. And the years are going on. And it mentions also how many years Yaakov is there in Egypt. And he knows, he's old already, so he can't just go back himself like that. And so he's talked with Joseph, and he implores him that when I'm dead, I want to be buried in Hebron with my parents, my forefathers. I want to be buried there. And Joseph answers, of course, I will, for sure, yes. And Yaakov makes him swear on oath that you are definitely going to do that. So, and he does that, but, there's a question, like, why did you have to even emphasize it? And then further on, when the sons are at his deathbed, and they're all getting a blessing from Yaakov, and it says there that Yaakov was ready to tell them about what's going to happen in the end of days. And it's like a cliffhanger. And there's all kinds of explanations because he didn't tell them what's going to happen in the end of days. And I was thinking over Shabbat and today, I was pondering this. With the state of assimilation that we have today, and that you have Jews in greater number today that are joining BDS, or if they're not, absolutely no connection or interest in anything Jewish from any era that I could even remember, that there's the question, why did Yaakov forget? Why did Yaakov not tell them what's going to happen? It says that the Shekhinah left him, so he didn't have the ability to say to them what is going to happen in the end of days. I think he was looking at his sons, and he was a little dumbfounded that I see reality, what's going on. He's building here, he's building there. I have to convince Joseph, I have to make him swear that he's going to bury me in Israel. They're all so far away from what the original intent was, to come down to Egypt temporarily and maintain our identity and go back to Israel and build a society there, that they have left that in Yaakov's mind, in my opinion, it escaped him. End of days. They're not interested. And our generation here, rank and file, are not interested. The future for Jews is in Israel. I wish I did not say any kind of a commentary like that. I wish I could say something more optimistic. I just saw the other day, there's a synagogue not far from where I grew up called the Beth David Synagogue Congregation. And I remember that place, large conservative synagogue filled with Holocaust survivors and your traditional rabbi, and it was conservative. And at the time, conservative was more that, not so much that they're compromising on things, but the rabbi's kind of like bending some things because these are Jews that know, but what are you going to do? Chaim, he has to work on Shabbat. And this guy, in order to pay for this, so I'm going to make it so they could come into shul and that. So that was like conservatism then. That they're going to bend some rules, make it a little lenient for a knowledgeable Jewish community of predominantly survivors. Fast forward, the rabbi of the synagogue there now is a lesbian. And I look at some of these lesbian rabbis. Some of them are affiliated. Some of them give platforms to BDS leaders. It's like so far from where the community was at one time and what kind of feel they had for Judaism, for Torah. It's a different generation completely today. So in the fight against anti-Semitism, sure, there are people, I can find people to stand up. And I can inspire, and I spoke in Montreal, and we were in a hall in Montreal at a hotel, and, it was packed. I got a standing ovation. I spoke in Calgary, same thing. I spoke in Vancouver, same thing. I don't do this for a pat on the back. I can motivate some in the community. But for the most part, the reality is the community is slipping down in an abyss that's not healthy. In Israel, the Jewish community there is very vibrant. Jewish identity is very vibrant. That's the commentary, and I'm not the only one that says that's the commentary of diaspora Jews today.
Yeah, I've been saying that for years already. That
Yep.
the second we put money above morality, we kind of lost a fight here in North America.
Mm-hmm.
I remember years ago I fought one of the Jewish schools in Montreal was pulling Judaism out of their curriculum. They felt
Right.
that it was very hard to teach Jewish kids Judaism in their
Mm-hmm.
Jewish school. And so they hired a couple of rabbis to go and pull Judaism out of their curriculum. They wanted to
Right.
compete with the secular private prep schools that were getting a lot of Jewish students, and they felt that if they competed with them, they would they would get more students. So the best way to compete with them is to get rid of your Judaism and to beef up your sports programs and your other programs.
Right.
And that's what they were trying to do. And so
Right.
I took a very public stand against that, and I fought against them, and I riled up the parents. And they were doing it
Good.
they were trying to change it over to summer, where nobody was
Mm-hmm.
paying attention. Everybody was busy. Kids were in camp. Everybody was busy with other things, and they were trying to pass these resolutions over the summer so that when the kids came back in September, the whole school was different. And I started exposing what they did, and I exposed what they did for 2 months, the 2 months of the summer. And the parents went wild, and they had to have information sessions, and eventually they fired the rabbis, and the board of directors had to step down. It was a big mess.
Right.
At the end of all this, Alvin Siegel from the Siegel Center, the big man with the big money from Peerless Jeans, he found me in a restaurant one day. I was in one of the kosher restaurants. So I was shocked to see him
Right.
in the kosher restaurant. But he came up to me, and he says to me, and he's considered one of the stalwarts of the Jewish community. He gives millions and millions
Right.
of dollars. They have a theater named after him. They have a cancer center named after him. I mean, like big time money.
Right.
He came up to me in the restaurant and he said to me, "Hey, are you Howie Silbiger?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "You are the you are a dinosaur." He says to me, "And you are the biggest threat to Judaism today." And I looked at him. I said to him, "I'm the biggest threat to Judaism today." I said, "You're the one who turned a Jewish theater into a theater that has programming on Shabbos, and I'm the threat to Judaism." And he basically said, I don't donate to any causes that you're involved in. I don't support anything you support, and don't ever think of asking me for money, like I would anyway, right? But whatever. But the guy came to insult me, and he was so upset and so angry that I fought to maintain a little semblance of Judaism in the school that didn't have much Judaism to start with. I was trying to
Right.
pull up what little they had to inject a little bit of Judaism to Jewish kids, and I was the enemy of the Jewish people. That I have to understand that the future of the Jewish people in North America is assimilation. So
Mm-hmm.
so it just kind of reminded me of the story of Hanukkah, because we just passed Hanukkah. It just kind of reminded me of the story
Yeah.
of Hanukkah,
Yes.
where
Absolutely.
the important people said, "Hey, look, we got to be Hellenists, right?"
Yep.
And it was just a few people who stood up and said, "No way." I wish there were more warriors. I really do. It gets. I'm sure you feel the same way sometimes. It gets frustrating to be almost the only voice screaming for the same thing.
Well, I don't really feel frustrated by it because I mean, I went to yeshivas in Israel, and they were under the auspices of Rav Kook, that I guess would be considered the founder of religious Zionism, although really religious Zionism and Torah, the truth is, are hand in glove.
Yeah.
So the founder is Avraham Avinu, but modern day religious Zionism, and I don't believe there's any permanence to the exile. I believe living outside of Israel is exile, and I believe it's consistent with what the Torah says. So I see the Jewish future in Israel. And I see that it doesn't absolve, when you live outside of Israel, your obligation to help Jews in Israel. I don't take anything as I don't take it personal, and I don't take that position. There are challenges. I see the hourglass. I see what's going on with it, and the obligation is there. My plans are to end up in Israel, and very soon. I thought I'd be there as of May, in fact, but because of the corona virus pandemic and all that, it doesn't allow you to the luxury of coming back and forth to take care of things over there and come right back here. And like you can't fly both ways because you're going to be in quarantine there and here
Right.
on all that. So I got to put some plans aside until things get a little more healthy regarding this pandemic. I hope it happens quickly, but listen, there's a lot of work to do still, and it doesn't take away the obligation to speak the truth.
I
Never
agree
get
with you.
despondent about it. Never.
Mayor, you just started a podcast. Tell me about the podcast. How can people listen to it? What do they have to do?
Well, it's wonderful. I thought it was, that's one of the good things, if you could say that comes out of this pandemic, is that you start thinking about alternatives to having meetings and having rallies and activities and that, and just thought, there's a lot of information that I'd like to give over to our community, to our supporters. Vital stuff. And I believe that having a podcast show live with a phone-in is the way to go. So we tried it first, tried one show, had a real good reaction, got calls, and we've been doing it, I think this Wednesday night will be the 6th episode, and we cover issues and we expose organizations. And in fact, the last show we made it a little different. So we're trying to perfect things. We're not there completely, but this, like for instance, the last show, we invited somebody in to call in from Israel, one of the small cities, small towns outside of almost in between Netanya and Caesarea, to explain. She's from Toronto, to explain the cost of living there, and because a lot of people have ideas, but I could never move to Israel because the price is exorbitant anywhere. I want to be in Tel Aviv in a penthouse. I can never get that. Or Jerusalem, I want to live adjacent to the Kotel. I can never do it because it's anyway. So we're trying to we're trying to give a message with some of our contacts in Israel, and this woman from this town called Harish, and a lot of people are very interested in what she had to say. So we had her on for about 15, 20 minutes, and she gave some great information. We also had a martial arts instructor on for a segment as well to demonstrate that there's been, in fact, in New York, more vicious physical assaults on the Jewish community, knife attacks, and you name it. So he was demonstrating some practical moves and techniques. We had him on for about 15, 20 minutes. Then we got on with the show, and we still had the phone in and a lot of information that we were giving out about current trends of anti-Semitism and what's going on in the community and leadership and such. So it's been a real blessing, getting tremendous feedback from people. And again, it's a work in progress, and every week it gets better and better. And we're not there yet to compete with the Ben Shapiro show, but we're working on it.
You'll get there. You'll get there. I have faith in you. Mayor, thank you so much for joining me. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much, and all the best to you.
And to you, and good luck on the podcast. I hope everything works out, and I hope you I hope you come back on again very soon, because
absolutely,
it's really a lot to talk about, and we should talk a little more often, and get things squared up a little more often. I think it's
for sure.
I think it's important
for sure, anytime
to expose it. All right, I'm Howie Silbiger. This is the Howie Silbiger Show. I'll see you again on Tuesday for Political Hitman, midnight, Wednesday morning, Tuesday night, Wednesday morning. Until then, have a great week.